Hey everyone, so this will be our third and final, at least if I don't make any changes, contextualizing video on the new raw context series. What I suspect is that the raw context is studied by highly open-minded yet logically inclined individuals. You see, it takes a lot to look into something as bizarre as a group of people with different roles and somehow opening a gateway, a communication channel between their body complexes and a denser kind of body complex. It takes extreme open-mindedness to even consider this, but to engage in it, I mean, and there are many channeling attempts that are not either as narrow band and therefore as dense in the intelligence of the transmission or are outright shams. This is problematic because it, definitely discredits the content of the channel. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you call the channel if you understand the law of one. Everyone is united on a stratum, a global or cosmic stratum of identity. This has not been, integrated into our scientific and mathematical fields, but it's underway. It's already a growing academic intuition. It's still trivialized. It's still, kept off on the wayside and said, well, you really can't do anything with this, but it's starting to emerge and integrate. So we can appeal to your intuition regarding our unity, our ultimate unity, which means that all channels are essentially just adjacencies in a kind of cosmic self-entanglement. And the adjacency is not just spatio-temporal, as we've discussed. The adjacency would be emotional, would be conceptual, right? These are concepts and emotions know no distance or time. The difficulty is that we think that concepts and emotions are materially encoded and therefore materially confined. Yes, they're materially encoded. That's how you instantiate an emotion or instantiate a concept through a percept, or an emotion through an interaction or a situation, but they are not limited or confined to their material encodement. The encodement is actually the instantial or executive aspect of their entanglement. And the entanglement is non-spatial and non-temporal in local and linear senses. If we want to generalize space to non-local space, okay. But a non-local space topologically is, something that we don't consider to physically exist per se. Unless you start drawing, distant adjacencies between, which is a paradox, right? Between wormholes or other connective structures that are intrinsically non-local, but we would say that these only exist on the quantum level, and then everything that is classical, including the cosmic scale, would, because usually we don't consider the cosmos to be quantum, at least we distinguished all these scales, right? And we would say that there is no, non-local connective structure, and there is not non-linear connective dynamics, right? Where spatial structure and temporal dynamics would get generalized to self-dual structure, as we mentioned, and teleodynamics. If you're interested in what those terms mean precisely, then you'll have to watch the biopathic method series, where we start introducing the biopathic sub-method of the syntactic method, and the syntactic method is how we hybridize scientific and axiomatic methods, stepwise hybridize them. Every single step of these two methods is hybridized, and therefore we generate a new kind of syntax. Now, when I say we, I'm not discussing just myself. The point of this little ramble is that assigning credit in an ultimately unified system is a kind of courtesy, right? Obviously, we're designed to experience different strata of intelligence and therefore different valences and capacities of interaction, which is part of the fun. We're in a dense illusion, shall we say, and to quote Ra, we suggest that the nature of all manifestation is illusory and functional only insofar as one turns from the shape and shadow to the one, the infinite one. Which means you can have courtesy, you can give a courtesy to someone, but you're not deluded into thinking that authorship is truly local or linear. It's not. So, we can give courtesy to Ra, but Ra would, in fact, in the contact, the point is that Ra discusses their congruence with humans. So there's a few statements to the effect that you are Ra and Ra is human. Again, there's always going to be a congruence between localized entities in the face of a global identity. However, that global identity can still draw distinctions, logical and empirical distinctions between local entities, strata of intelligence. We can think of these as strata of activation. The denser strata of intelligence that we activate, I know I'm speaking a little bit abstractly, but we can handle it, the more connected or entangled we become with each other through the global identity. Okay, which of course has been called God, the Godhead, Brahman, and other, Allah. Other spiritual traditions have recognized this intuition and built it up into cultural and ethical systems of interaction. And many of these cultural and ethical systems have gone awry quite badly, but there are still nuggets of, tender perfection that we can extract and integrate into our new generalized metaphysical system of cultural, ethical, intellectual, and ultimately spiritual interactions. So, why would one attempt to build on the previous Ra contact? Well, that question assumes that the previous Ra contact is a complete compendium of metaphysical information as it is understandable to third density mind complexes. The Ra contact, even though it spanned 3 years, intermittently, the first year, 1981, I think it was, that there were about 72 to 76 sessions, I can't remember, starting in January, but then the sessions became more sparse as the group encountered certain difficulties, certain logistical and metaphysical difficulties that are interesting but not directly relevant to these contextualizing remarks. And therefore, 106 sessions is a lot, but it also doesn't mean that the Ra contact was maxed out. In fact, the Ra contact was, and this is one of the things I like about it, it wasn't the question and answer portion, which is pretty much everything, but there's a time space or non-terminal portion that I'm also paying ode to, was inhering in a kind of non-linear progression from widely different topics, from geopolitics to the chakra system in a metaphysical sense, to, the function of the pyramids, to the history of the earth. I mean, and again, very, very interesting, but a very bizarre mixture of history and philosophy. And Ra explicitly said that history is not their main function. They're here to describe and discuss the philosophy of the law of one, which means that the more you stray into history and into specificity regarding certain entities, certain behaviors, etc., the more you start to detune the purity of the contact. And this is what invited or attracted difficulties of an interdensity nature, to be a little bit cryptic, to the original trio. These were complicated by the fact that establishing a material, a kind of a parameterizing factor, which is what the raw material is. It's a factor which parameterizes future information, which is what all texts are. But when it comes to esoterically derived texts, or texts that were derived under certain anomalous conditions, we have to start reminding people who are going to become worshippers in a way, even if it's subconscious of this information, that this information is parametric. Okay. Now, what we're getting to is that not only is the Ra contact not a complete compendium, but its inaugural text, which is available to us, is acting as a parameter for building a future information and is not merely something to apply. Yes, the essence is present. The essence of the law of one is absolutely present in the original Ra contact. Has it been comprehensively integrated into our third to fourth density transition as a planet? as social systems, as individual systems? No. And that's what, and especially not through our medical system, which is a primary focus of mine. Okay, my sister is a doctor. I have many people who are medically inclined in my vicinity, and I'm sensitive to, especially sensitive to the illnesses and injuries that are, running rampant on our planet. So my motivation personally is very strongly focused on those who need to heal, or at least need to stabilize. So much of the question and answer because this raw material is not purely question and answer, actually, but much of the question and answer portion is devoted to updating our contrapathic and naturopathic methods of medical science to what I call the biopathic method, which in a fashion similar to that of the stepwise hybridization of the axiomatic and scientific methods, is also able to hybridize the philosophies underlying contropathy or allopathy, the idea that you can mechanically treat and prevent and stabilize body complexes, and that illnesses and injuries don't have a metaphysical component or a generalized evolutionary component, with the naturopathic method, which basically says that we just need to keep the body complex in a comfortable and balanced state without actually integrating a lot of the scientific findings that we've made about the body complex. In other words, the naturopathic method, I know we're getting a little off track here, but it's relevant. The naturopathic method is basically appealing to the subtle aspects of the body complex, which are not easily locally or linearly observable, yet does not take into account that the body complex does have observable aspects, and those observable aspects are the instantial aspects, the products of programs. And so long as you don't integrate those products into the programs, your programming is going to remain intuitive and wishy-washy. It's not going to be something that somebody who is scientifically minded can read and understand logically. Okay, it can only be understood emotionally. And there is a logic of emotion, but you have to extend syntax, the syntax of logic, into purely qualitative and generalized evolutionary, arenas. And that's not easy to do. That takes a complete updating of the scientific method and its allopathic or contrapathic sub-method. But anyway, this is what we strive for in the second portion of the raw contact. Now, to pay homage to the original trio and their inaugural work, the great inaugural work that was done under much risk and consequence, is to not truncate, because there will be more. It wasn't premature. There will be more sessions. There will be more contact products. But to close or pause this informational sequel at 106 sessions. And the biopathic method is developed on an introductory or initiatory basis through these 106 sessions. Detail is given to very interesting yet highly ambiguous statements that Ra released regarding what they called time-space, or the non-terminal programming and processing domain in more scientific/mathematical language. Okay, so this is produced out of one, importance regarding the biopathic method and its ability to update our third density modes of treating to fourth density modes of healing. We're treating and healing. Healing requires treating as a necessary condition, but the insufficiency of treating lies in the fact that we're not perceiving generalized yet unique evolutionary functions in illnesses and injuries. We're not actually defining injuries and illnesses as forms of higher order catalysis, where our spirit complex is programming catalysts from emotional levels of syntax to perceptual levels of syntax to logical and physical levels of syntax. And the programming is what some physicists would misleadingly understand as retroactive or retrocausal, but it's not a linear time reversal, symmetry. we're talking about something that is intrinsically nonlinear and loop-like, which means that its emergence from physical to logical to perceptual to emotional levels of syntax or structure appears to be linear and appears to be from the bottom up and appears to be reducible. It appears that the higher order aspects of illnesses and injuries, namely the symptoms and the personality changes and the lifestyle changes that it induces on you, are reducible, we say, to these lower order aspects of the catalyst. But the lower order aspects of the catalyst are instantial or executive, and they do appear to emerge linearly and locally. But the higher order aspects of the catalyst are programmatic and are not simple and are absolutely not mechanical, which means that we're not working in a deterministic system. We're also not working in an indeterministic or non-deterministic system. These, when you disjoin higher order and lower order aspects of a system, you assume that the higher order aspects are, retrocausally determining, or we could say even just progressively determining the lower order aspects, and the lower order aspects are indeterministically emerging with certain mechanical or deterministic functions that are governing the overall stability or the structure of a system, but not its dynamics, which is why science appeals to random dynamics all over the place. It's a mixture. It's a randomized, mechanized mixture of dynamics and structure. Dynamics are always subject to randomness in our scientific paradigm, and actually we can argue whether it's with increasing or decreasing randomness regarding whether we're talking about subatomic systems or biochemical systems or organological systems or societal systems. But regardless, the dynamics are always randomized and the structure is always mechanized. When you actually understand that this mixture is a kind of self-dual structure, meaning it's incorporating executive or instantial structure and programmatic structure, as well as teleodynamical, meaning that the programmatic structure is designed to induce certain goal-directed dynamics, and even the formation of goals is a kind of attractor formation, where the goal is an attractor. Then we can start to update our scientific paradigm in terms of a generalized syntactic paradigm, which includes semantics. Usually syntax and semantics are disjoint. Watch the most recent biopathic method series video if you want to understand the basics as to why syntax and semantics cannot be disjoint in principle. But anyway, I'm getting a little carried afield here. So here's the point. Number one, the raw contact is absolutely not a complete compendium of metaphysical information. Number two, the raw contact begs for, it follows that if one is interested in pursuing refinements or extensions of metaphysical information that could aid others, then it is obvious that one should do so, right? One is going to be motivated by feelings of inspiration and compassion and valor and other heart virtues that are purely positive and have no ulterior motives. In fact, we couldn't really put together concurrence until all of our ulterior motives of, being perceived as highly intelligent or having privileged access to subtle information or whatever, were cleared, and properly cleared, not downgraded as inferior and unwanted, but rather learned from and thanked. On that basis, could we actually produce, concurrence? So, I discussed in a story video that I had severe, potentially life-threatening bacterial pneumonia that only began to subside once I surrendered to feelings of humility. I was humbled so deeply by this that I realized that this was a massive personality imbalance in me. Since I've been working to purify myself of all ulterior motives and to become intrinsically motivated